I'm Newt Gingrich. I think it is totally appropriate that we're having this particular debate on 9/12. And in the spirit of 9/12, I hope to work with you to fundamentally, profoundly change Washington in what will be a long and difficult struggle against the forces of reaction and special interest.
Speaker Gingrich, would you raise the retirement age for Social Security recipients?
No, not necessarily. But let me start with, I'm not particularly worried about Governor Perry and Governor Romney frightening the American people when President Obama scares them every single day. Let me just say to all of you.
Oh, let me just pinpoint the question. What would you do to fix Social Security?
Okay, but can I also expand for a second? Because that was not a rhetorical joke. President Obama twice said recently he couldn't guarantee delivering the checks to Social Security recipients. Now, why should young people who are 16 to 25 years old have politicians have the power for the rest of their life to threaten to take away their Social Security? Now, I just want to make two simple points about Social Security and how you save it. The first is you get back to a full employment economy, and at 4% unemployment, you have such a huge increase in funding that you change every single out-year projection in a positive way. The second is you say precisely as several folks here have said it. If you are younger, everybody who's older and wants to be totally protected, fine. No change. So don't let anybody lie to you, starting with the president. No change. But if you're younger and you'd like a personal account you would control instead of the politicians, and you know you'll have more money at the end of your lifetime if you control it than the politicians, why shouldn't you have the right to choose?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How do you do that? How do you protect seniors, balance the budget? So much of the budget goes for defense and entitlements like Social Security, Medicare.
But that's just a Washington mythology. And anybody who knows anything about the federal government knows that there's such an enormous volume of waste that if you simply had a serious all-out effort to modernize the federal government, you would have hundreds of billions of dollars of savings falling out. Let me say, I helped balance the budget for 4 straight years. So this is not a theory. Rick and I were working together on this. This is not a theory. You voted for it. So we can balance the federal budget. But let me start with, all of you should go to Strong America Now, which is a group that believes if you modernize the federal government, you save $500 billion a year. Now, check and see whether the super committee of 12, in their august power, is willing to sit down with that group and actually learn how to be smart rather than cheap and actually modernize the federal government. One example. The federal government is such a bad manager of money that somewhere between $70 and $120 billion a year in Medicare and Medicaid is paid to crooks. We wrote a book several years ago called Stop Paying the Crooks. I thought it was pretty obvious, even for Washington. So I would start to balance the budget by stop paying the crooks, not by cheating honest Americans.
Let me bring Speaker Gingrich into this conversation. Jobs, jobs, jobs. All of us who covered you when you were Speaker and you worked together with President Clinton at the time, you compromised, he compromised, you got things done. There was a budget surplus for as far as the eye could see. If you were president, would you work with the Democrats, assuming they were the majority in the House or the Senate? Would you compromise with them on some of these gut issues?
Well, you know, after the last debate, when Governor Huntsman and Governor Perry and Governor Romney each explained how their state was the best at job creation, Brady Cassis, who works with me, went back and checked. In the 4 years I was Speaker, we created, the American people, not me, created more jobs in Utah than under Governor Huntsman, more jobs in Massachusetts than under Governor Romney, and more jobs in Texas than in the 11 years of Governor Perry. Now, I don't claim credit for that because it was done by investors and done by people. In fact, MIT at that time was in the private sector as part of the job creation. But I just want to point out, the American people create jobs, not government. Okay? Now, Ronald Reagan, when I was a very young congressman, Ronald Reagan taught me a great lesson if you have Democrats in charge. and that is to go to the American people on principle, have the American people educate their congressman. He used to say, I try to turn up the light for the people so they will turn up the heat on Congress. When we passed welfare reform, half the Democrats voted yes because they couldn't go home having voted no. And on a principle basis, I'd be glad to work with Democrats in any office, but I do it on principle, not on compromising principle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker Gingrich, some of the biggest companies in the United States, the oil companies, they get, I guess what some would call government handouts in the form of tax breaks, tax exemptions, loopholes. They're making billions and billions of dollars. Is that fair?
You know, I thought for a second you were going to refer to General Electric, which has paid no taxes. You know, I was astonished the other night to have the president there in the joint session with the head of GE sitting up there, the president talking about taking care of loopholes. And I thought to myself, doesn't he realize that every green tax credit is a loophole? That everything he wants, everything General Electric is doing is a loophole? Now, why did we get to brakes for ethanol, brakes for oil and gas, et cetera? We got to them because of this idea which the young man just represented. If we make it possible for you to keep more of your own money, you will do more of it. We have a simple choice. We can depend on Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Venezuela, or we can encourage development in the United States of manufacturing, as Rick said. We can encourage development of oil and gas. We can do it by saying, we're going to let you keep more of your money if you create more of what we want. I'm for an energy-independent America, and that means I favor people who create energy.
But I just want to follow up, Mr. Speaker. If you eliminate some of those loopholes, those exemptions, whether for ExxonMobil or GE or some other companies, there are those who argue that is, in effect, a tax increase, and it would violate a pledge that so many Republicans have made not to raise taxes.
Yes, a lot of people argue that. They're technically right, which is why I'm cheerfully opposed to raising taxes. This government, we have a problem of overspending. We don't have a problem of undertaxing. And I think that it would be good for us to say, we're not going to raise any, which is why I'm also in favor of keeping the current tax cut for people who are working on Social Security and Medicare. I think trying to raise the tax on working Americans in the middle of the Obama depression is a destructive policy. So I don't want to have any tax increase at any level for anyone. I want to shrink government to fit income, not raise income to try to catch up with government.
Do you plan to decrease defense spending to balance spending, or do you believe high spending is essential to security? Speaker Gingrich.
I think we are at the edge of an enormous crisis in national security. I think that we are greatly underestimating the threat to this country. And I think the day after we celebrated the 10th anniversary of 9/11, we should be reminded exactly what is at stake if a foreign terrorist gets a nuclear weapon into this country. We have failed for a decade to deal with North Korea. We have failed for a decade to deal with Iran. The developments in Egypt and Turkey are much more dangerous than anybody is looking at in this country. And I think we need, frankly, to ask for a very serious national dialogue. I'd like to see both the House and Senate right now holding hearings on 3 levels of security. What do you do in Mexico, where there's a civil war underway next door to us? What do you do in the Middle East, where we have totally underestimated the scale of the threat? And what do you do about our national domestic industrial base, which is crucial if we're going to be competitive with China? All 3 of those are a major threat to us.
Something you would bring to the White House if you were the next president of the United States. An example, President George H.W. Bush put in a horseshoe pit.
I would reduce the White House by kicking out all of the White House czars the first day, creating a lot more space. And then, because of Callista's interest, we'd have a lot more music. Because of my granddaughter Maggie, we'd have ballet. And because of my grandson Robert, we'd have a very large chess set. So it would all come together.